Hello, Garland Nixon, Scott Ritter here. We got a lot to talk about. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here. And of course, as always, at some point in the show, we're going to point you over to scottritter.com so you can figure out how to keep up with all things Scott Ritter. But let's get going here. Scott, let's start here. And we got to touch base on this because there's all of this talk of, the Witkoff and crew, and they met with the Russians, and I don't know, they must have had on like a sneakers and a AC/DC t-shirt or something. You picture them laid back like this, and they're chilling out, and the Russians are talking, and they're talking. Apparently the Ukrainians are, as usual, we won't give up anything, we'll stand tall. And a lot of people I'm like this. I don't really report on this so-called Ukraine peace talks anymore. To me, there's nothing to report on because it's like everybody's you and I've been over there. Everybody knows what the direction this thing's going and what has to happen. So the concept of peace talks is, it's busy work, maybe. I don't know, but that's all it is to me. Your thoughts on the whole concept? One thing I'll say. I do say this, and the Russians have always said that it is very necessary for nuclear powers to talk. And I know the Russians, even though they always say, it's necessary. This is important. We weren't talking before. So I will say it is important for them to talk, but this ain't really peace talks. Anyway, Scott.
Well, it's not peace talk. It's capitulation talk. So first of all, let me apologize to your audience. I was out shoveling snow when I realized I had an appointment, and I've got hat head. So,
as I say, at our age, Scott, because we're the same age, just have a little hair on there and still, having a little fuzz up top is a good thing.
Having a hair problem is better than having a no hair problem. So,
exactly.
But anyways, I just don't want people to think that I'm disrespecting them or anything. But, we got a lot of snow and it's got to get moved, and I was trying to move it. On these talks, I think the Russians have made it clear that, their basic demands are unyielding on this. And Trump, let me put it this way. This is I'm getting ready to piss off everybody, but I don't care. I really don't anymore. He's a moral and physical coward. Just straight up moral and physical coward. He's a bully who hides behind his wealth and uses his wealth as a leverage to intimidate people. But when it comes to actual physical confrontation and doing what's right, Donald Trump is incapable of doing either. The Delta Force raid on Maduro, was as close to a sure bet as possible. I can guarantee you this. Listening to Donald Trump speak afterwards, well, it was touch and go there for me. He saw his presidency disappear before his eyes when the report came in that the lead CH-47 took heavy fire and that the pilot had been wounded and things like that. He saw his presidency collapse because had that plane been shot down, and had we lost, 30 odd special operators in Venezuela trying to kidnap that's the end of his presidency. It's all over, finished. And he knows that. He did it because he was told it was a sure thing. And when it turned out not to be a sure thing, he's blowing up, boats in the Caribbean is not an act of heroism, people. I just want to remind you, it's an act of cowardice, and it's illegal, but that's another statement. So this is a man who always backs down when confronted by people with real steel. And Vladimir Putin is a man of real steel. He doesn't blink. He doesn't bluff. He doesn't, he doesn't back down. He will do what's right, but he's not going to deviate from the objectives he's set. And you're seeing this play out because now, look what Donald Trump has done. You remember, I'm so unhappy with Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin's the horrible man in the world. He can't do anything. I'm going to sanction him to death. I'll even get the Ukrainians to try and kill him and deny that I tried to kill him. I'll do all this, that, and the other thing. Putin's like, and we're just going to take Ukraine off the grid. And then when we realize there's not a damn thing we can do, Kiev is a dead city right now. a dead city. And it's going to take decades for Kiev to recover from this. As we speak, in all those high-rise buildings, the sewage lines are bursting. And there is literally shit-filled water pouring off the balconies of buildings, covering the inside. Kiev's a dead city, and it could totally die. I mean, when you got the mayor saying, get out of town, guys, and then don't come back, that's the reality. And Russia right now is in a position where now even the Ukrainians say, one more attack and it's all over. We lost the capital forever. It's gone. We won't be able to recover from this. And Russia is building up the capability, and that's the leverage they had at the negotiating table. Because, Budanov was coming in talking about, we need to stop this, we need to stop that, we need a ceasefire, and the Russians went, we will stop hitting Kiev if you stop right now hitting our energy targets. But if the next time you hit an energy target, we're taking your city off the map, off the grid. You're dead. And, Ukraine's looking over to the United States saying, what are you going to do about this? Americans are like, take it or leave it. This is the world you live in. And then they took it to the next step. The Ukrainians are like, this cessation of, Kiev being taken off the map is now linked. It's not a standalone thing. The Russians aren't playing that game. The Russians went, oh, yeah, there's another thing. We will only do this if you sign on to the agreement that says you evacuate the Donbass. Oh, and the war doesn't end until you evacuate the Donbass, and then we'll talk about the end of the war. Before we can even have that conversation, you got to get the hell out of Dodge because that's our land. You don't get a vote. You don't get a say in anything. It's ours, and America's going, it's theirs. It's theirs. You got to go. And the Ukrainians go, well, what about security guarantees? And the Americans like, well, we'll talk about those after you leave the Donbass. And so the Ukrainians are in a lose-lose situation. And that's where we're at. This isn't a negotiation. This is a capitulation. This is Russia getting what they want. This is Ukraine waking up to the fact that they've been abandoned by Europe. The curious thing about all of this Greenland stuff and the distraction is Ukraine, where's that $800 billion or euros that Europe was saying they're going to give them? No one's talking about that anymore because Ukraine's not a priority. Suddenly Europe is realizing, what do we do when daddy's mad at us? What happens if daddy leaves home? Looking at Ursula von der Leyen, can mommy take care of us? And the answer is no. And they're panicking about this, the consequences of losing the United States. Europe's waking up to the fact that all their tough talk, they've got nothing. I mean, even Mark Rutte, he had to sit there and put him on notice. Anybody who thinks that any European nation or Europe in general can defend itself without the United States, think again. You can't. We can't. They're finally waking up to the fact that they need America. They need America a hell of a lot more than we need them. And so you're starting to see a shift inside Europe, which means that this whole Ukraine game is being pushed to the side. Zelensky's a nobody right now. Merz came out and just said, the concept of you joining the EU in January of 2027, one of Zelensky's core demands, I won't talk peace unless you guarantee. And Merz's like, no, you don't meet the qualifications, and you're not going to, probably ever. They're just hammering nails in the coffin of Zelensky's Ukraine. And this is where I think we're at. I always laugh when people are like, who's the Russian delegation? And I'm like, well, it's the head of the GRU. Oh, well, I mean, can he? I said, you got to understand, he doesn't negotiate. He's not there to listen to you. He's there to repeat what he's been told to repeat and make it damn clear to you what the consequences of your failure to comply are. He left and said, we're very happy. Ukrainians aren't very happy. So that's where we are with these negotiations. And, Ukraine will find out if they play around. The Russians have accumulated, they have saved up, precision guided munitions, the whole thing. The next attack on Kiev will be the last attack on Kiev because they will come in and take out every last survival node there is. And the Ukrainians are already saying, we can't repair it. Even come summer, we're not going to be able to repair this. we might be able to get this up and that up. But if the Russians hit again, they'll get nothing up. And then the Russians will just turn to other cities and take them off the grid until all Ukraine is taken off the grid. And then it's a question of what collapses first, the will of the people or the military. And it's a race right now because the people can't survive. They can't survive. And for all the people out there saying, well, how cruel is that? I don't know how cruel it was when NATO targeted Belgrade and did the same damn thing to the Serbians. Tell them if you want to stop freezing, if you want to stop suffering, just agree to the 5 points that we've dictated to you. Now, the difference between what NATO did in Serbia and what Russia's doing in Ukraine is international law. NATO manufactured a case on false accusations of genocide to illegally seize territory, annex territory, Kosovo, from a sovereign state. Russia articulated a legitimate claim of self-defense under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, collective self-defense that was done correctly, properly. And that's the difference. Russia's adhering to the rule of law. NATO doesn't. But Russia's playing a hard game. I mean, this is a hard game. War is tough business. And again, I just have to, I participated in a strategic air campaign against Iraq that did the exact same thing. What did we do on day one? Shut down the power grid. I remember as a weapons inspector, you read about it. There was this new cruise missile, the new Tomahawk. You're like, whoa, didn't know about this one. And you're flipping through and going, wow. And it shoots out carbon fibers as it goes. It basically flies and goes across the grid, shooting out carbon fibers that short the entire grid and knock the grid out. And later on, there was an Abu Ghraib power station, and the Iraqis had buried a bunch of destroyed Scud missiles near there. So to get there, we had to drive through the power station. And I just remember seeing the carbon fibers everywhere. They're blanketed over the whole thing. And it's up there. You got to rebuild the whole thing because it will short it out. You cannot generate any power there. It's an ingenious weapon. This is what you do in wartime. You shut down power grids because power grids, drive communications. They make things function that help facilitate command and control. It's a legitimate act of war. So for all the people out there saying, why are they doing this? Ask yourself why they didn't do it sooner. That's the key question here, because all the people calling the Russians cruel, we are 4 years into this conflict. If Russia wanted to do harm to the Ukrainian people, Russia would have done this on day one. Russia didn't do this on day one because Russia's goal has never been to bring harm to the Ukrainian people. Russia's always tried to get the Ukrainians to come to the negotiating table by confronting them with the reality that they will not prevail on the battlefield. But Ukraine continued to take hundreds of billions of euros and dollars worth of support, send people to front, slaughter 1.5 million of their population. And finally, Russia is saying, we're bringing this thing to a close. And so now they're doing what should have been done on day one. Had they done this on day one, this war would have been over a lot sooner. But again, Russia wasn't viewing it as a war. Russia was viewing it as a special military operation. And the genesis of Russia's actions didn't come from Russia redefining how it's going to fight the war on the battlefield. It was Ukraine operating at the behest of the CIA, MI6, and others, engaging in a strategic war on Russia's energy infrastructure. Ukraine started the energy war. And Russia has been going through different phases, reminding the Ukrainians the entire time, we can always take it up a notch. And finally, the Russians said, turn up the volume. And now Kiev is done, and you're going to lose other cities, are going to lose everything. And finally, the Ukrainians have woken up to the reality of what they're facing. And it's going to take a moment for Zelensky to come to grips that it's over for him. And I think you're going to see the political collapse come very rapidly, because he is a failed leader of a failed state, and he has no solution. And the Ukrainian people are waking up to this failure. They tolerated the failure because of the corruption machine, and the largesse that flowed their way from this. But now the corruption machine's being exposed to everybody. The anger is starting to build up, the resentment. And so you're looking at political collapse, societal collapse. We already have economic collapse, military collapse. That's the collapse of Ukraine. And that's why the Russians are happy. But it's not a negotiation. This isn't something that's happening because Russia's negotiating. This is happening because Russia's dictating. And the vehicle of the dictation is the United States, Donald Trump, who suddenly isn't all keen on sanctioning Russia to death and doing all this because he realizes it doesn't work. Daddy doesn't scare Putin.
Well, I'll say this, the what is it, the Latin term "vae victis," woe to the vanquished. That's the way war. That's the way war works. If you lose, it is what it is. And I'll say, let me add this, because Scott and I have both been, we've been to the museums in St. Petersburg, which was Leningrad, and we understand. If you understand what the Russians went through, what the Russians suffered, then you understand. Then you look at it differently, and you say, "You people are lucky that they didn't just flatten everything." When they saw guys goose stepping around with Hitler tattoos all over them on their border, they are so lucky that the Russians, based on what I saw, based on what they went through, 1 million people dead, civilians fighting, people digging trenches in the icy cold while they were starving to death to try to hold off. When you see that, you're lucky they didn't just flatten. And based on what they went through, as much of a peacenik as I am, I couldn't have blamed them if they did. Luckily for the world, they just said, "We're not going to kill everybody," but they could have.
Well, we're blessed by this. Is the other revelation about Russia and the Russian people. Look, I'm an American and I'm proud of being an American, but I piss a lot of people off because I'm an American. And you push me, even if as a peacenik, you push me, I'm going to kick your ass or die trying. When people say they want to bring harm to America, I draw the line and say, "Bring it on, then, bitch. I'll bitch slap you all the way to hell." And they're like, "Well, that's not very peacenik of you." No, it's American of me. I recognize this. I've written about this. I'm not happy about it, but it's who I am. It's what I am. Be thankful that the Russians aren't like me. All right? Because the Russians have a hell of a lot more reason than any American does to be aggressive, resentful, and vengeful. We talk about the museums. The Russians accurately reflect these museums. It's not just St. Petersburg. We went to Rzhev. I made it a point. I told Garland, when we arrive, I'm taking you to Rzhev. I said, you have to see it. It's absolutely essential that we start your journey in Russia with this. And Rzhev is a place where millions of Russian soldiers died from 1942 to 1944. But the key part is in 1943. I'm sorry, is in late 1942, early 1943, while the Battle of Stalingrad is raging. I've been to Murmansk. Yeah, we got to go there. You got to see it. Giant, the motherland calls, tears rolling down your eyes. I mean, it's emotional. The walls with the names, it's just crazy, and it's worthy of the glory that has been put on it. But what they didn't talk about for the longest time in the Soviet Union was Rzhev, up north, due west of Moscow, where the Russians had launched a series of attacks to let the Germans believe that was their main counterattack, and it froze the Germans in place. Up to 6 divisions that could have been released to reinforce Stalingrad, to bust through the Soviet lines, to liberate the 6th Army, to change the outcome, couldn't go because they were stuck in Rzhev. And to keep them there, the Russians kept attacking and attacking and attacking, and they were getting slaughtered and slaughtered and slaughtered. Over 1 million dead, buried in the ground and forgotten, until Vladimir Putin came around. And Vladimir Putin went, "We will never forget the sacrifice made by all Soviets." And he built this monument, and the monument is sorrowful as you can imagine. The souls of the soldiers transformed into swans coming from the ground, swirling until they come into the form of the Soviet soldier looking down at you with eyes that at the same time show how brave and resolute, the sorrow of being forgotten. And the whole thing is here, never forget, never forget. And that's the thing. This isn't just about understanding history. It's how the Russians have absorbed history into their very essence, their very being. I had a wonderful conversation with Maria Zakharova. She's the spokesperson of the foreign ministry. And the conversation turned into, there's the swans coming up from the ground. Or cranes, I'm sorry, not cranes, not swans. But it turned into a conversation, not an interview. And she talked about her grandmother, and how her grandmother, when in Leningrad, having starved, when they started bringing their German prisoners of war out, she saw how hungry they were, and she gave them her bread ration. And they said, "Why are you doing that?" She said, "Because that's somebody's son. That's somebody's husband. That's a human being. That's the compassion of the Russians. So they had the compassion, but they also, I mean, one of the places, I'm a pretty strong guy emotionally. I try to be. And I'll tear up afterwards, when I go to places like this, or, in private, I'll just wipe away a tear. I'm not, very public with my emotions. But in Crimea, when I went to the museum of the bunker, the last bastion of defense of Crimea and all that, you walk to that museum and you go through a corridor where you go in and there's stars above you, and it's dark and there's stars. And as you walk through, the stars turn into the faces of the soldiers and civilians who died, and they're staring down at you. And it's just overwhelming. But basically the message is, never forget what we sacrificed for you. Never dishonor the sacrifice we made for you. When I went to Vodkinsk in 1988, in the town, there's a memorial to the heroes of the Soviet Union, the memorial to the war. Every village, every town you go to in the Soviet Union, now Russia, has a memorial where the people, they go and they lay flowers all the time. It's not one of these forgotten memorials. It's a real memorial where they lay flowers, where they visit, where they reminisce, they reflect. I was in Moscow on Victory Day, and I saw the parade. And in the West, they call it propaganda. It's not propaganda. You have to be in the crowd and feel the energy of the crowd, the pride they have, not just a militaristic display, but the pride that this was the defeat of the Nazis. Victory Day. Victory Day. We in the West, especially the United States, we don't understand that, because when our boys came home and they marched in the victory parade, they marched through cities that were untouched by war. We went back to homes in towns and villages untouched by war. Untouched by war. Their entire damn country was flattened. 27 million people killed. And this is in their DNA. And we have to understand that. We have to understand that the Russian people will never yield. They will never back down, especially when the cause is just and the cause is right. And they can absorb more pain than is humanly imaginable. They don't want to. They love life. We know that, Garland. The Russians love life as much as we do, and in many ways more, because they understand what they're living for, what the value of life is. But God, we need to be so utterly grateful that the Russians are who they are. Because if they were me, we'd be fucked. We'd be fundamentally fucked. Because if the Russians had my point of view and my mindset, even believing in peace and diplomacy as much as I do, if you push me, you're getting a fight. The Russians don't want to fight. But if you make them fight, you're going to lose. Just saying.
Yeah, Ukraine would have disappeared on day one. Luckily, it didn't. And I predict that one of these days, Ukraine effectively will be like Chechnya, that it will be that, because when this thing is over, no one will be able to help Ukraine but Russia. I'll still remember the first in February. It was a few days after the war, and Scott was on our program in Washington, D.C. on a radio show, and he said, never forget this. And I've ever since then, I kind of played off of it. He said, none of these regimes in Europe will stand after this. None of them. And back then, they're all gone now, except maybe Macron, but they're all, when this is over, because think about it. We've got to do this and suffer. Why? Because if they win, then they move to Poland and on the journey, on to the English Channel. You know what? It's getting obvious now. It is getting obvious. They can't even play that anymore. They can't even say that anymore. That game doesn't play anymore. They have nothing in this business. Yes, we've got to rearm so we can be ready to fight the Russians by 2030. They ain't saying that anymore, because they know the best they can do is, well, I guess we'll stop buying Russian gas, which is stupid.
But even then, they're going to end up buying Russian gas.
Yeah, of course.
It's like, sorry, guys, you were wrong on everything. Yeah, it's interesting, Garland, you mentioned Chechnya. And I'll bring this up at the end of the show, but I'll just bring it up now. Garland and I are planning to go to Russia in March. So donate. We can't go without your help. But one of the things we're going to do is we're going to Chechnya. I'm not going to give away the whole agenda, But the reason why we're going to Chechnya is to explore the very issue that Garland has talked about. How did Chechnya in Russia get to where they are today, knowing that they fought two horrific wars? One started in 1993, the other one started in the late 90s, going into 2005. And we're talking about the kind of wars that horrible things happened on both sides, the kind of wars that generate emotions that, in theory, should take generations to heal. How did they get from this to where they are today, basically from 2005 to 2025, 20 years? How did they get to the point where the Chechens are some of the most loyal subjects of the Russian Federation? Chechnya has been totally rebuilt. How did we get there? Because for all the people out there spewing stuff about Ukraine, talking about the level of hatred that exists, there's people on the Russian side saying the same thing. I mean, the term "chochol" is used more and more and more and more, and it's not a good term. There is hatred, and the Ukrainians, of course, they're getting the snot beat out of them, and suffering, and there's going to be resentment. Well, God, did you see what Grozny looked like in 2002? It looked like Gaza, flattened, gone, leveled. And other parts of Chechnya resembled that. Look at Grozny today, totally rebuilt. It's like Las Vegas in terms of the lights and all that. Peaceful city. People walking the streets. You can go to Shali, and you can go to the other areas where there was heavy fighting, where the villagers there are part of clans who believe in blood vengeance. And if you kill one of their sons and one of their men, they will hunt the person down forever. I mean, you still see in the cemeteries there's a certain flag that's flown that says the person down here has yet to be avenged. And you're like, oops, that's going to be a bad day for somebody. Because they take this shit seriously. They're very serious. But there's peace today between Chechnya and Russia. How did they get there? Because that's the formula that needs to be captured. And so Garland and I are going to try and capture that. We're going to go there and we're going to try and capture it. We're trying to bring it back to you and try to educate people. But it doesn't happen on its own. We have this great vision. Now we need to fulfill the vision. In order to do that, we need help. So go to that donation page right there and donate. And we've got another. It's a 2-part trip. One of the parts is Chechnya. The other part I can't talk about right now because it's not 100% guarantee. We have 2 options, both of which are awesome, and we're waiting to see which one facilitates itself. But again, it'll be as cool as going to Chechnya, although going to Chechnya is one of the coolest things in the world. And it also but if you want this trip to happen, and it's going to happen, but we have to pay our way. We have to pay for everything. That's what independent journalism is. And since neither Garland and I have corporate sponsors or independently deep pockets, we need your help. So, Garland brought up the Chechen model. That's an important model. It's an essential model to understand what a potential path to post-conflict peace looks like in Ukraine. And I think the more people understand, again, just my daughter went to Georgetown University. She studied, Caucasian affairs, Southern Caucasus, but also the Caucasians in North. Her goal was to be a foreign service officer, to serve in the State Department. And to be a foreign service officer, you got to be an expert. So she got her master's degree at the Foreign Service Institute in Georgetown, specializing in Russian and Caucasian affairs. Okay. I brought her with me to Russia in December of 2023, January of 2024. In addition to getting to see Russia and experiencing, what she's Orthodox, experiencing what an Orthodox Christmas is, what an Orthodox New Year's is, and how an Orthodox country celebrates these things, which was very spiritual for her. I took her to Chechnya, where she got to have lunch with Ramzan Kadyrov, the head of the Chechen Republic. She got to meet Abdi Aladinov. She got to meet Adam Delikanov. She got to meet Lord. Lord is, he's now prime minister. At that time, he was just Lord. Badass dude. And she got to meet the Chechen people. They're so kind. They have the Chechen National Theater. They put on a special performance just for us. And then we were invited on the stage, and they put one of those cloaks over my shoulders, and we did Chechen dancing. That's a video that will never be shown in public. But and I did my infamous or famous or whatever speech before 25,000 Chechen soldiers. But it was a unique experience where she developed in-depth insights into the region she was studying. And she went back to Georgetown, and her fellow students were sending her text messages telling her to kill herself, to commit suicide. They were telling the school to kick her out of the program, that she was a shame. A shame for what? Seeing firsthand what reality is so that you can incorporate it into your studies. But you see, Georgetown is supposed to be the premier academic institution for the Foreign Service. They don't want that. They don't want to know the truth. They don't want to know the reality. They want to imprint everybody with the same CIA, State Department thematics of Russophobia. Everything's bad about Russia. And for God's sake, nobody in America wants to know the truth of Chechnya. Nobody in America wants to know the truth. And all the people that are writing about it don't know anything about it. I've had the honor and privilege of going there twice. We're going to go there a third time. And, I learn something new every time I go there. And it's essential that we capture this. I've gone there twice and I've tried to capture it. Maybe I need help. That's why I'm bringing Garland, another journalist, to bring another pair of eyeballs and see this. But the more we can educate people about the reality of Chechnya, the more people will realize when I talk about the Chechen miracle, what I'm talking about, because it's a freaking miracle. To go from where they were to where they are is a miracle. It's a miracle of leadership, both Chechen and Russian, but it's a miracle of the spirit and humanity of the people themselves, of the Chechen people who are fundamentally misunderstood in the West. And so this is why it's essential that we go there, and it's essential that you help us go there. So anyways, that was my pitch. Sorry, Garland.
All right, everybody. And of course, there we go. There it is again. Just go to scottritter.com, and there's his homepage. We'll touch on that again a little bit with all of the stuff he has. But over here on the far right, donations, boom, and there's all the various ways you can donate and help and help Scott with his very important work that he's doing. The last thing I'll say is this: the build
very important work that we're doing, Garland.
Yes, that we are doing. Yeah, it is important stuff. People, we talk about Russia. And I've heard this and that about Russia, but until I went and experienced it, until I met with the Russian people, talked to people, until I sat on panels and answered questions. And, we did this panel in St. Petersburg. Yeah, I didn't know what to expect. We're in there and there are all of these, there's Scott and I, a Marine and a ex-Marine and a cop, and there's all these people with all kind of acronyms behind their name, internationally known economists and all of these people, right? High government officials, academic officials, former foreign minister for Austria. Scott and I are sitting there, and I'm like, well, I guess I'll just kind of sit here in the corner and listen. That wasn't what it was. They were like, they didn't even want to talk. They were like, Garland, Scott, the people in the audience, they wanted to know. And then I got comfortable, and I'm like, well, hell, I'm never at a loss for words. But once I realized these people are intellectually curious, and they don't care that I don't have a PhD in international affairs from Georgetown, kind of makes things better. They want to hear, okay, these guys are Americans. What do they have to say? And the whole room in this like internationally known academic institution that's been around for hundreds of years, were like on the edge of their chair. What's Garland and Scott going to say? And I realized, wow, these people are intellectually curious, and they really want to know what they want to know what you're thinking. The people in the chat, they want to know how you feel. It was an outstanding experience, and it taught me a lot about the people, the Russian people.
No, I look, this has been my experience the entire time. I came to Russia after 30 years, back in May of 2023. And, it was an eye-opening experience, but in many ways it paralleled the similar experience I had when Russia was called the Soviet Union back in 1988, 89, 90. We don't deserve, I'm sorry I have to say this, but we don't deserve the status that we're given. I mean, when you put American behind somebody's name, Garland Nixon, American, Scott Ritter, American, people want to hear what you have to say because they're curious about America. It was the same truth back in the Soviet Union. I mean, we went to Vodkinsk, which was a closed city, where literally no foreigners other than German prisoners of war had been, and the German prisoners were there to build buildings, refurbish the town, and then they got the hell out of Dodge. But this is where they build intercontinental ballistic missiles. They don't let foreigners in this town, and we lived among them. Before they built our housing out next to the factory, we lived in a hotel, a converted hotel right there in downtown Vodkinsk, where we got up and we could walk the city. We had an area that we could walk. We could go shopping. We could mingle with the people. We were a citizen of Vodkinsk. And it was curious because when they first saw us, I mean, literally, one of the kids at we had a relationship with school number 10, I think it was. And they were like, "Where are your horns and where are your tails?" Because we were told you are the devil. And we're like, well, we were told the same thing about you. But, we learned to be people. But they just started asking questions about who we are. Our opinion mattered. They cared what we thought about. And like you said, you didn't have to have, Michael McFaul, PhD, Stanford University professor behind you. All you had to do is say, "I'm American." "Really? Where are you from?" "I'm from, New York." "Wow, how's it like there?" They're curious. They just want to know. And this is amazing because right now they're struggling with this thing called the United States of America that's threatening them with existential survival, that's talking about strangling them to death economically, that's promoting war, that is behind the Chechen conflict. The Russians know who brought the Wahhabis in. This is the CIA, and they know why, to bring down Russia. They know all this, and so they see all this. They hear about America. Then they meet us, and they're like, "Okay, where are your horns? Where's your tail? What do you guys think about?" And it's so essential that Garland and I and others go there because we put a human face on what otherwise is not a very pleasant mask. The Russians are looking at the United States and they're not seeing good things. The Russians are waking up that Hollywood's one big frickin' lie, because the Russians used to look at the Hollywood films and go, "That's America." And now they're realizing that's just fake, that it's just a story, that it's not real. It's a Hollywood ending, an American ending. And the reality is far different because they've felt the consequences of it. Live in a nation that's been subjected to sanctions for 4 years, or even longer, since 2014, even longer, because they don't like Vladimir Putin. Feel the pinch, the economic pinch. Feel the pain when things go boom and your boys come home in a coffin because another country doesn't want to let you live. We don't treat people well that come in. I mean, look how we treat the Muslim population after 9/11. Just blanket hatred of everything Muslim because some terrorists hijacked airplanes and flew them into a building. Even today, we have this Islamophobia sweeping across the country. The Russians, Ambassador Polyansky. You've met him. Nicest guy. Really, just a genuinely nice guy. Well, he got promoted. He's in Vienna now, heading up the OSCE and all this. But the nicest guy in the world, and yet he was treated like utter crap in the United States. We treated him horribly. Anatoly Antonov was the Russian ambassador, a true expert on America, loves America, wanted to teach America to love Russia. He was promoting culture exchanges and things like that. And they ignored him and belittled him and demeaned him. I mean, we treat the Russians horribly. But even on their worst day, I mean, the Russians will do the reciprocity. They'll say that the Americans can't shop here, you can't travel here, you can't do that. But you won't find an American living in Moscow that says when they walk down Arbat Street, the Russians treat them like crap. The Russians are friendly. The Russians are welcoming. And most importantly, the Russians want to hear them. They truly care what you're thinking, what you're saying. So when Garland and I were sitting there in St. Petersburg, I mean, it was a wonderful thing to have. And even Karen Knissel, who's the former Austrian foreign minister, the head of the Gorky Center, she said, she's done a couple of these things, with Russian on Russian crowd, and she said you could barely get 5 students to attend, and after 10 minutes they're all leaving or they're burying their phone. The room was packed. The room was packed with people that wanted to be there because we were there, not because we're famous, because we're Americans, and they just wanted to talk to Americans. There's a desperate need right now in Russia to try and put a human face on the awful reality that America has become. And it speaks so well of the Russians that they're trying to seek out humanity as opposed to what we do, what I do. I'm guilty of it. I'm again, push me and you get a different me. And my brain goes Marine Corps, and it's not a pretty thing. I'm not proud of it. I'm just being honest about it. Thank God the Russians aren't like me. That's all I can say. Thank God the Russians aren't like me.
I even had, we're just about out of time, but I even had people say to me, what was it like, Garland? I mean, there's not hardly very many Black people in Russia. And I said it was very difficult because Scott and I couldn't walk a block without somebody walking up saying, Scott Ritter, Garland Nixon, I know, can I take a picture with you? I said, so, it's, you really can't get anything done because there's a Russian every other 5 feet who wants to take a selfie of you. I didn't know they knew who the hell well, actually, they knew who Scott was. And they're like, that's the guy in the video with Scott. So we know who he is too.
we know Scott, hey, you're the guy in the video. And I said, well, it's because it's his show.
So at any rate, before we go, let me just remind everybody that you can go to scottritter.com. And of course, when you go to scottritter.com, it'll take you to his Substack, and he's got all kinds of things, Ritter rants, and he's got his Trump watch, the Russia House. There's a lot, Russia House, go there. There's a lot of good stuff there. There's a tremendous amount of interviews that he's done. And I was involved in some of them in Moscow, but I mean, really high ranking Russian people, whether it's in the government and culture, etc. It's just fantastic stuff. You'll love it. You'll learn so much just by checking out those interviews. And of course, as Scott said, hit the donation button. You got to, if you can in any way get involved and help out, then make sure you donate, and you can help fund the next trip to Russia. Thanks a lot, everybody. Scott, thank you very much. Certainly appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Carl.
All right. Talk to you soon. All right, everybody. Just thanks to all my Patreon people and PayPal and all that stuff. And don't forget, I have for those of the snail mail mentality, which there's still a lot of people, I got a P.O. box. You can mail whatever you want to mail to that P.O. box within reason. Thanks a lot. We're out.